Hey again, travel bosses. I'm excited to bring you this week's sponsor, TripStreak, the smarter travel search. What I love about TripStreak is the ability to set your personal preferences to either have or avoid red-eye flights or have things like completely lie flat seats. So the next time you need to book a flight, check out tripstreak.com/travel-like-a-boss.
Welcome to the Travel Like a Boss podcast, the radio show all about traveling like a boss by being your own boss. Stay tuned for weekly interviews featuring guests that have built their own online businesses. If you would like to have access to our entire back catalog, visit travellikeabosspodcast.com for instant access. And here's your host, Johnny FD.
Hey guys, it's Johnny and welcome to episode 161 of the Travel Like a Boss podcast. I'm here today with Stewart Patton. How you doing?
Hey, good, Johnny. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on. I wanted to have this episode right after tax season so people had kind of the sting of paying taxes or kind of maybe a relief of not paying that much, but they're thinking about next year.
Yeah, it's definitely a good time of year to evaluate where you are when it comes to taxes and, do some things to improve the situation if you can.
Yeah, definitely. So, Stewart is a tax attorney, and you have a course, with US Tax Biz. You guys can check out the link. We have a link to it at dropshiplab.com/tax, and that'll be in the show notes. But could you give us a little background on who you are and kind of how you got here?
Yeah. So I'm a U.S. tax attorney. I started out in life, working at big law firms right out of law school. And I culminated as a partner with Kirkland & Ellis in Chicago. And, Chicago is an interesting town. I really, really loved it for 3 months out of the year. And then another 3 months is kind of tolerable. If you fall in Chicago, it's kind of cool. But then for like the, 6 months of winter, Chicago is kind of terrible. So I did 6 winters in Chicago before I'd had enough of that. And luckily my wife is from Belize and we met in law school. So, and then also before we moved down to Belize, in Chicago there, we have 2 young kids. They were 4 and 2 at that time. And so, trying to survive the Chicago winter and raising kids without family all that close is a fairly difficult thing to do. Plus with the stress and all that of working at a big law firm. So, we moved down to Belize and I started my own practice as, focusing on helping Americans who live or invest abroad.
Okay. That's awesome. So what exactly actually is a tax attorney? We've heard the terms, tax accountant or CPA, which is what, certified public accountant. What exactly is the difference between that and a tax attorney?
Yeah, it's interesting. Tax is one of those areas where there are lots of different professionals that do different things, but really, so I guess a tax attorney is a type of transactional attorney, so like if you're going to buy or sell a business, you would generally get an attorney involved if the business is of any size, to kind of put the agreement together and go over the terms and things like that. And so that's generally the sort of thing that a tax attorney does works like in the big law firm context, a tax attorney would work with other sorts of attorneys on deals. So what I used to do a lot of was setting up private equity funds and real estate funds and then doing deals for those sorts of funds. And, that's everyone kind of is used to doing their taxes every year and all that sort of thing. But so it's easy to forget that tax is actually a body of law, So just like, securities lawyers deal with securities law and, labor lawyers deal with labor law, tax lawyers deal with tax law. So I design structures to help my clients pay as little tax as possible. And that's what I've been doing, since day one. The clients I used to work for, were large private equity funds and things like that. And now I get to work for real people, basically.
Okay, very cool. So I think one of the goals of this episode is I want to give everyone a big picture outline of how much tax they're paying now and kind of what they're responsible for. And I've outlined 6 steps that I've learned from you where we can, really break down, and it and help save people money. And then if people want more help, or they kind of want their handheld and, have a kind of deeper explanation, then they can check out your course. So first, let's talk about what a normal person's taxes, or just using me as an example, I was living in California, and even though I had been living, moved to Thailand pretty much year round, I think I would go back to visit, but I was still a resident of California, and I was still paying just normal, U.S. income tax. Do you know kind of off the top of your head what kind of the percentages are?
Yeah, well, if you live in California full time, and if you're paying California tax, then California plus federal, especially if you're self-employed, I would just figure 40%. Like that's some kind of very rough number for how much of the money you make you're going to have to send to either the U.S. or California in taxes each year.
Yeah, and then that percentage actually grows the more money we make, right?
Yeah.
So I remember my first, maybe 6 years living in Thailand, I wasn't really making any money anyways, so it didn't matter. I think I was actually making less than 10,000 a year, so my income tax was basically zero. And it wasn't until a few years ago that I started my online business and I started making a significant income. And I remember, I think it was last year, my bill ended up being close to 30 grand, which that's when a fire was lit under my ass, and I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I spent this much in tax. And there has to be, and I'm not even living in the US. I'm not using any of the services. I'm not using the roads. I'm not using, any of the features. Why am I paying all this tax? And that's when I, decided to take your course and go through it and kind of figure everything out.
Yeah. It can really be a shocker to a lot of people that, that if you kind of don't structure things correctly, if you don't really think about what you're doing, then you may just end up paying a bunch of tax. But there's no, like you found out, there's really no need to do that. You just need to invest a little bit of time to kind of learn how all this stuff works.
Yeah, Zach. So the first thing that I did, and I guess the first kind of step in all of this is just to be out of the U.S., and there's something called the bona fide residence test, or something easier called the physical presence test, where as long as you are out of the U.S. for 330 full days of the year, you qualify for something called foreign earned income exclusion, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So let's take one step back. Okay. So even more fundamentally, how I like to think of tax in this area for expats is that the ideas here are arranged in sort of a pyramid, okay, with 3 levels, and the most basic concepts are at the bottom, and then the concepts get more refined as you move up to the top of the pyramid. Okay, so at the bottom of the pyramid, the most basic idea here is what's called citizenship-based taxation, and that is that the U.S. is basically the only country that does this, but as a U.S. citizen, you're still subject to U.S. tax, even if you live in Thailand full time, or you bounce around to a bunch of different countries, or you live on the surface of the moon, or you circle the Earth on the International Space Station. It doesn't matter. If you're a U.S. citizen, you're subject to U.S. tax. So living outside the U.S., at this level of the pyramid, living outside the U.S. is not some fundamentally different thing to do than living in the U.S. But then when you move to the next level of the pyramid, there are some special rules that apply whenever you live full time outside the U.S. And the main one is what you just mentioned, the foreign earned income exclusion. That generally allows expats to make up to about $100,000 per year from providing personal services and pay no U.S. federal income tax on that amount. And so putting the second layer here together with the bottom layer of the pyramid, the thing to keep in mind is that all the rules are the same unless they are different. Okay. So things like capital gain and investment income and things like that, well, you still have to pay U.S. tax on that amount. Those sorts of income are not foreign earned income. So that's the thing to know, is just that, some rules change, but not everything changes. And then at the top of the pyramid, there are special legal structures to use to allow you to take the best advantage of the special rules that are in the second level of the pyramid. So,
yeah, I think before we jump into all that, I'm very happy we had you on, because I think a lot of times people might hear, the buzz term like, oh, foreign income exclusion, 330 days. Okay, I'll just do that. But you kind of just reminded us why it's so important to have an actual tax accountant or a tax attorney on your side to make sure you're doing it right, because it does get a lot more complicated.
Yeah. And, whenever you live in the U.S. and you have a job, Well, they're going to withhold employment taxes and U.S. federal income tax from your paycheck. So you you get your W-2, you file a tax return, and it's all super simple. I mean, you can do it with one arm tied behind your back, and you don't really need to understand everything. You just put your info into TurboTax and it just works. But whenever you're an expat, you really need to understand how this stuff works. I mean, I know tax is boring to normal people, but it's just kind of part of being an expat and being an entrepreneur as well, is you got to spend a little bit of time understanding this stuff. And, as you found out, the time you spend figuring this stuff out, you can make a bunch of money, but, so you get a really good return on your investment.
Yeah, definitely. So I think the biggest mistake I made was, even though I had kind of heard about this stuff a few years ago, it didn't really matter to me that much because I wasn't making that much money yet. But I think this is very important for people who plan on making money either next year or the year after, to start getting these things in place, because there's a lot of these things that, aren't just overnight. I mean, moving things like your residency, changing states, or setting up these kind of, semi-complicated corporate structures will take a few weeks, if not a few months.
Right.
So I think the first thing I would recommend to people, aside from just planning on being outside of the US, so pretty much step 2 of what I did was to move your physical home base in the US to another state that doesn't have tax. So I moved from California to Texas, and I actually have a blog post on that. You can search on johnnyfd.com. And while I was there, I started not only an LLC, but also a business bank account in that state.
California is at the center of a nasty little Venn diagram because they don't recognize the foreign earned income exclusion, and they will actually go after people. If you leave Illinois, for example, like I did, then in your final year you simply file a part year resident return. And I told them I moved to Belize, and then I haven't filed an Illinois return since, because I'm no longer a domiciliary of Illinois, and everything's been fine. But with California, it can be a little bit more complicated than that. They kind of try to hang on to people who live there. And if you move to another state, then California says, okay, bye, enjoy life in Texas, see you later. But if you move to another country, sometimes California kind of takes the attitude that, oh, well, you're just kind of doing this whole gallivanting around the world thing, but you're still a Californian because that's where you were in the U.S. back when you're in the U.S. So doing the Texas 2-step like you did, moving to Texas first and then to Thailand, that can definitely be helpful.
I didn't realize that California doesn't recognize that.
Yeah, it's a little bit annoying.
Has it always been like that? Because this is actually the first time I've heard about that.
Yeah. I mean, there are like 5 or 6 states that just for state tax purposes, the foreign earned income exclusion doesn't exist, and so. Generally, whenever you do state tax, you start with your federal taxable income, and then you make adjustments according to the rules of that particular state. And so California and then 4 or 5 other states make you add back in the amount that you excluded using the foreign earned income exclusion when you're figuring your state tax. So that's why it's important to kind of get out of California correctly and please, so that there's nothing to worry about there.
Okay. So, I think that's a little bit more clear. So as a resident of California, I can still pay less federal tax because I'll qualify for the foreign earned income exclusion, but I'll have to pay a higher state tax because California will make me pay it on the full amount and not the deducted amount. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is there's no reason to do that. I mean, that's the result you get if everything has gone wrong, basically. You want to leave California whenever you move outside the U.S. so that you don't have to do that.
Okay, definitely. So the states that don't charge state income tax is Texas, Alaska, Florida, Nevada, South Dakota, Washington, and Wyoming. Would any of these be a bad choice?
No, and really, it's not all that necessary. Like the whole idea of the Texas 2-step is that you are getting some documentation and some things going on in Texas, so that if you need to show that to California to prove that you moved to Texas, then you can. But you're not going to file a Texas tax return. And so really, any state works. So let's take a step back, I guess. Okay. So first of all, how the law works here is that the U.S. Constitution imposes limits on a state's ability to impose their tax on you. Okay. And that limit is that a state can only impose its income tax on a domiciliary of that state. Okay. So you have to be domiciled in that state in order for the state to be able legally to tax you. Well, domicile means that, you're domiciled in a state if you wake up there every single morning, and that one's pretty obvious. But also, if you leave the state, but you're kind of doing so on a temporary basis, then you haven't moved your domicile. You're still domiciled in that state. Okay. So two easy examples of that are like let's say you grow up in California, so you live your whole life in California, but then you decide to go to college in New York. Well, you're just going to New York for college, and so it's not like you've kind of started an independent. You're not a real person yet, right? You're in college or something, so you still are really a California domiciliary, even though you're waking up most mornings in New York. And so and this is assuming that like you go back to California every summer and every Christmas and things like that. Another example would be, you are in the military, you're stationed at a base in California, and then your unit gets called up and you have to go outside the U.S. to work. Well, it wasn't your idea to go outside the U.S. and you're only doing it as part of, the military. And so really you're still like a Californian, So whenever you move to Thailand and you have no intention to return to California, you're really not a domiciliary of California anymore. So California really doesn't have any power, under the U.S. Constitution to impose its tax on you anymore. But the thing is California, doesn't necessarily believe that. They want to push their power to the absolute limits. And so they'll still bother people. And so the idea of moving to another state and, getting a driver's license in that state, opening a bank account in that state, things like that, those are really sort of belt and suspenders sort of ideas so that you, instead of saying, hey, California, I moved to Thailand and then having them potentially bother you because they still think you're a California domiciliary, you say, hey, California, I moved to Texas. And then you have some stuff to show them that you moved to Texas if kind of push comes to shove.
Okay. Thanks for clearing that. Makes lots of sense. So if you guys are planning on being a nomad or, living abroad for most of the year, in the upcoming years and you don't plan on coming back to California or whatever state you're from, where you return your taxes, make sure you make that move before you head off on your big trip. If you want to know how I did it, just read my blog post. I'm into detail on that. So one other thing that I did before I left, was I started an LLC in Wyoming, and unfortunately, I wasn't smart enough to start a business bank account in person, while I was still in the US. So I had to do it online. And most banks won't let you do it just online only for, with security reasons or whatever it is, except for Bank of America. Unfortunately, Bank of America sucks and I do not recommend them. So I'm planning on going back to the US just to open another business bank account sometime soon. So make sure you guys do that before you leave. And I think the next step was to actually have your LLC be in another state, such as Wyoming. But it doesn't really matter where your US LLC is, does it? Or I guess it has to be out of California if you don't want to pay taxes. Is that correct?
Right. Well, it's not a good idea to have it in California. For anyone, whether you're ex-California or not, really if you're going to form an LLC in the US, the three most popular states are Wyoming, Delaware, and Nevada. And Delaware is a little more expensive. There's like a $300 minimum franchise tax you have to pay. And I think Nevada is a little more complicated. Their annual report is a little more extensive than the other states. And so I use Wyoming just because there's no minimum franchise tax, and the Wyoming annual report is just dead easy. You just have to list your assets in Wyoming, which for most of my clients is $0. And so I like Wyoming. Plus, I just have a registered agent there that I like using, really. So that's another reason that I like Wyoming. But it's just a really easy state, business friendly. No, like you said, no state tax. So there's no quality component to the where the LLC is formed. So it's not like if you have a Delaware LLC, it's not like you have a more, there's some benefit along with having that LLC that you get. Delaware is kind of the default among lawyers, and so you might read about Delaware in that context. And the reason for that is that Delaware has basically a really long and a really good history of settling business disputes in their court system. So in law school, we all learn about Delaware law, along with the law of whatever state we go to law school in. And so among lawyers, it's sort of the default. And so then that means that among like multinational companies and like big companies in the U.S., no matter where they are, they'll form companies in Delaware. But with us mere mortals, that just own businesses, there's no extra juice from, that long history of Delaware law or whatever. That's not worth paying $300 a year for. So Wyoming is really just the way to go.
Okay. Definitely makes sense. And I guess, for our type of businesses, it'll apply. I mean, Wyoming's just fine. And Wyoming, I could vouch, it's super easy. And because it's such a small state, people are very friendly still. So if you email somebody at the, in Wyoming, whatever company you're dealing with, they're usually very friendly and they get back to you. So I would definitely recommend them as well. And what I like is on your course description page, you kind of list some of the businesses that are good for this, being location dependent. So something, that you physically need to be in the US for. So, let's say property rental or a restaurant or something, it's not going to qualify, but location dependent businesses are things like anything that's on a website, maybe a SaaS business, which is like software as a service business, drop shipping, FBA, affiliate marketing, and you have a whole list on your course page. You guys can check it out at dropshiplab.com/tax and scroll about halfway down and kind of shows who would benefit most from this.
Yep.
And any other thoughts on what type of businesses have you seen do well with this, and which ones besides the ones I mentioned you really stay away from?
Well, okay, so we're kind of getting into the issue now of like legal structuring, okay, and so I think Johnny, kind of one of the issues that you had early on was that you formed an LLC, but that's all you formed was an LLC, right? And you were not doing business through a non-U.S. corporation. And so that's an issue I see a lot with digital nomads and expats who are doing a location independent business is they may just form an LLC and do business that way. And if you do that, you're going to pay tax. There's just no way around it. Okay. So first of all, if you're just doing business through an LLC, that you wholly own, let's say, for example, then you are self-employed for U.S. tax purposes. And so you're going to pay self-employment tax. And that's about 15%, up to about $118,000. And it's 3% over that. So on your first $100,000, you may be expecting to pay no tax because you say, okay, well, I qualify for the foreign earned income exclusion because I'm spending, less than a month per year in the U.S. And so that means I don't have to pay any tax. Well, it doesn't quite work that way. The foreign earned income exclusion only works for U.S. federal income tax purposes. When you're self-employed, you still have to pay the self-employment tax.
Well, let's pause right there, because I think a lot of people don't realize that it's different. So let's say somebody's making $100,000. They might, qualify for the foreign earned income exclusion. So instead of paying, $30,000, they might only have to pay and then let's say they moved out of California or out of somewhere with tax. So now they're saving that 30% plus that 8%, but they still have another 8% from self-employment tax, which adds up. That's, $8,000 right there. And if you're trying to grow your business, and you're making more than that, you might be spending $16,000 in self-employment tax. And that's actually what made me pay so much in tax last year, and actually this year as well, because I didn't have my non-US corporation set up yet until this year, until now, which is going forth in 2008, 2017 is going to kick in effect. But for my taxes last year and the year before, even though I qualified for the foreign earned income exclusion, and even though I moved out of California, and just by doing those two things, I saved a ton of money on taxes, but I still had to pay like $15,000 on self-employment tax. And what you're saying now is this next part, by creating our non-US company, I'm not going to have to pay really any of that, or less of it at least.
Right. Yeah. So now let's be clear about one thing. paying self-employment tax might be a good thing. Okay. I know that sounds crazy to hear a tax lawyer say that paying tax might be a good thing, but let's look at the situation more holistically. So whenever you pay U.S. federal income tax or state income tax, that's money that you give to the government, and then they do something with it. And theoretically, as a citizen, theoretically you benefit from it somehow, some way, right? But like you said, you're not using the roads and stuff. So it's a little bit, difficult to think about how exactly you benefit. But with self-employment tax, it's a little bit different because theoretically, at least, that money is your ticket to getting Social Security, down the road when you turn 65 or 62. And then, the amount you get in Social Security depends on the amount you pay in over the time. And you have to pay in for 10 years before you qualify to get any Social Security at all. So self-employment tax kind of needs to be considered in this larger context of, you can kind of think of it as an enforced savings mechanism where you're probably getting a negative return on your investment maybe. And maybe you get nothing back if Social Security is not around when you turn 65 or whatever. So,
or if they push it back until you're 70.
Yeah. And I can tell you, I have clients who are, expats who are nearing, or over 65, and they moved out of the U.S. when they were young, and Social Security is not around. And it's something that, maybe it would be nice if they were able to get a check, even for $1,000 or whatever, from the U.S. every month. But that's not available to them. So if you've already worked in the U.S. for 10 years, well, then you qualify. You have to get 40 quarters, technically, is how it works. So then, yeah, just paying self-employment tax, theoretically your benefit goes up because you're paying more in, but if you look at, if you're able to save that money yourself and invest it yourself, you're probably going to do better. But if you're young enough that you have not yet worked for 10 years in the U.S., then it might be something to consider.
Oh, that's actually really cool. I haven't thought about that. Does it have to be 10 years in a row, or just 10 years over your lifetime before you turn 65?
Yeah, just 10 years over your lifetime.
Okay. And is there a minimum that you would have to pay either each year or in total before you start qualifying?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, I think it's kind of you pay in or you don't.
Okay.
But yeah, so.
That makes sense, because I'm actually not too sure on how Social Security works. Does everyone get the same amount when they turn 65, or does it based on how much they've put in?
Yeah, it's based on how much you've put in, but there's a cap. So I've contributed the maximum for since I started working. After law school at least, and then I guess I contributed less than the maximum when I was delivering pizza and waiting tables in college and things like that. But my benefit amount, is not all that much. So yeah, definitely, it's not like. The relationship is not like directly linear or something where it just kind of goes up and up as you pay more and more. Definitely, you definitely can get to a point where you realize that you are, cannon fodder basically, and you are supporting payouts to other people. So that's kind of the whole idea of the system.
Okay, that makes sense. And I don't think anyone listening to this should rely on Social Security for your retirement. So, but it is a nice side benefit that I was not aware of. So now I think we can kind of get into the really kind of exciting, kind of juicy part is setting up a non-US company. Like, how much can someone actually save? So let's say, let's say I made $200,000 last year in net profit from my business. And let's say for next year, because now I'm actually set up, internationally. And let's say I did everything correctly. What would I normally have to pay if I didn't do it internationally? And how much would I be able to save if I did?
Okay. So remember, you're going to have to pay two different taxes, self-employment tax and then U.S. federal income tax. So self-employment tax, it's 15% on the first 118,000, and then it's about 3% over that. So let's just say $20,000 on 200,000. Let's just say $20,000. That's a nice round number. Also, it's complicated because half the self-employment tax is deductible for U.S. federal income tax purposes and all that. So we're using some round numbers here for example purposes. Okay, so let's say on your $200,000 of net profit, you pay $20,000 of self-employment tax. And then when most people think of the foreign earned income exclusion, how they think of it is you get the first $100,000 free of U.S. federal income tax. However, there are a couple of rules that apply here that knock that $100,000 benefit way, way down in certain cases. Okay. So the first rule is called the 30% rule. Okay. So how the foreign earned income exclusion works is you get to make $100,000 without paying U.S. federal income tax, but that's only for income that you make for providing personal services. Okay. So if you have a job, like if you're in Bangkok and you're working for Apple, remotely, then, everything you make is from your personal services because you have a job, or if you're like an independent freelancing consultant, then everything you make is from providing services as well. But if you own a business, like a drop shipping business, an Amazon FBA business, any business that you have to put money into in addition to having to put your time into, well, then obviously, like if you think of it as an economic matter, the amount you make from your business is not only a return on your time, but it's also a return on the money you put into it. Okay. So with the 30% rule, the IRS does some very, very rough justice here, or rough injustice, is probably a better way to think about it. And what the IRS says is, okay, if you have the sort of business where you have to put money into it in addition to putting your time into it, then you can only treat up to 30% of the net income from that business as foreign earned income. Okay. So let's use to pick an example of a business out of thin air, has nothing to do with you. Let's say drop shipping, right? Okay. So drop shipping, you have to select products and, put your time into it, but you also have to buy stuff in order to sell it. So it's a business where you have to put money into it. So, if you make $200,000 of net profit, then, if you only knew a little bit about the foreign earned income exclusion, you might say, well, I get the first $100,000 free and I got to pay tax on the other $100,000. Actually, no, you only get, $60,000. So that's the percent rule applies here. You can only treat up to 30% of your net profit as foreign earned income. So it's only your first $60,000, that is free of U.S. federal income tax because of the foreign earned income exclusion. So you have to pay tax on not $100,000, but $140,000.
Oh, wow, that's complicated. Okay, so what if it's something like
this rule?
What if it's something like a blog? Let's say I'm making the whole $200,000, and I wish I was, and I wasn't. But let's say somebody is making $200,000 off of a website, and they spend like $10 a year on the website for the domain, and maybe $5 a month or something, and the rest of it is just their time. Let's say it's Kim Kardashian blogging about fashion or something. Yeah.
So for them, so generally they do get the first $100,000 free of U.S. federal income tax. But there's also you keep taking this into a simple direction, and I keep bringing up complications. But there is another rule. Okay, there's another rule that makes it where the foreign earned income exclusion does not work exactly as you may expect whenever you are self-employed, and that rule is called the scale back rule. Okay, so the idea basically is that if you have gross income over $100,000 and then you have deductions that reduce that gross income, then you should not be able to use your deductions and the foreign earned income exclusion against the same item of income. If you do, you're kind of getting a double benefit. Okay, so like imagine, for example, you have $1 of net income. Okay, so whatever you did in your business, someone gave you $1 for it for the whole year. Okay, and then imagine you spend that dollar on something like website hosting, something deductible for your business. And so you're at $0, right? Well, if you get to exclude that $1 using the foreign earned income exclusion, you're now at -1. And so you've kind of created a net operating loss out of thin air. So basically the scale back rule says that you have to reduce the foreign earned income exclusion that you can take by basically there's math involved. Okay. But basically you kind of take into account the fact that you have gross income over $100,000 and deductions as well. So the net effect is that it's still not a clean $100,000 off. It's going to be something less than $100,000 off to the extent that you have deductions that are reducing your gross income as well. And then, okay, so let's make it simpler. Let's kind of put that rule off to the side. Okay, so let's say this person has $200,000 of gross income and no deductions for some reason. And then, so basically the first $100,000 would be free of U.S. federal income tax because of the foreign earned income exclusion. But then on that second $100,000 of net profit, they're going to pay U.S. federal income tax exactly like they lived in the U.S., because they're out of they are out of the foreign earned income exclusion. They're out of anti-income to use against that income. And so they just have to pay tax. And also, another thing here is sometimes people think, okay, well, I got to pay tax now. So that means that the tax rates start at the low part of the bracket and then you work your way up. But unfortunately, they thought of this one. And so, the brackets actually start where they would start if you did pay tax on that first $100,000. So it starts at 28%. Okay.
Wow.
So that's how we can simplify this so remember earlier we said on your $200,000 of net profit, you're going to pay like 20 grand of self-employment tax. And then now let's say you pay about 30 grand of U.S. federal income tax. Okay. So that's $50,000 together. So your $200,000 of net profit, you get to send $50,000 of those dollars, over to the IRS.
Okay. And that is without having a non-US company, correct?
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
That's just being a self-employed human, whether you have an LLC or not. So if you have a wholly owned LLC that you're operating through, then you're still, for U.S. tax purposes, that LLC is disregarded as a separate entity from you, which means it just does not exist for tax purposes. And so that means that you're still a self-employed human for tax purposes. And so you get the result that we just talked about. You get to send a very nice car, a BMW 3 Series, maybe a 5 Series, I don't know, to the IRS, out of the goodness of your heart, basically.
Okay. Well, I don't know if it's out of the goodness of my heart, but sending that check over. And I think that's actually what happened to me last year, where I thought my taxes were going to be a lot lower because in my head I had calculated getting the first 100 grand, 108,000, I think, for free from the IRS. And when my CPA gave me back my taxes, and I saw that they put in the foreign earner income exclusion, but I was still responsible for something like 30 grand. And I was thinking, like, why is this? And I think you just explained exactly what it was. And
now, so one thing, so remember that 30% rule I mentioned? I reviewed a bunch of, tax returns prepared by like these large expat tax return preparation companies. And a lot of them don't apply the 30% rule. Okay. And this rule is not something I'm making up, or it's not some obscure thing. I mean, it's in IRS publication 54, which is like the IRS's guide to expat tax. And it's also in the instructions to IRS form 2555, which is the form you use to claim the foreign earned income exclusion. So it says that, you can do a control F for 30%, and read the rule right in there. The thing is that like, I think a lot of tax software systems don't incorporate the rule. So there's no like checkbox in like professional tax software, where it says, does the 30% rule apply? Check here, so it's something that you have to do by hand. And so, as a service provider, you don't want to have unhappy clients. And so I think, either a lot of these types of return preparers that work for these churn it out sort of companies, either they don't know about this rule, which is very possible, or they kind of conveniently, don't think too deeply about it and conveniently ignore it because, no one likes to tell their clients that they have to pay tax.
Man, that would suck. So how many years does IRS have to go back and audit someone?
So the general statute of limitations is 3 years. But in other circumstances, they can go back further than that. The next question that kind of comes up a lot in this area is that like, okay, well, now that I know this, I have determined that my past tax returns are incorrect. What do I do now? Well, you actually don't have any affirmative obligation to go back and amend returns that you discover were done incorrectly. So you can just kind of hang tight and hope the IRS doesn't contact you. But now that you know about the 30% rule, I mean, if you sign that next tax return under penalties of perjury, with that scary language on the bottom of it, and the 30% rule isn't in there, well, that's now you're kind of doing something different than you were doing before knowing about how that rule worked.
Okay, so let's say someone had a crappy accountant and they messed up on their taxes, and the IRS does say, hey, where's this extra 30%? And you said, sorry, I didn't know about it. What are the fees for that? Is it like interest on top of what you have owed, or do you just pay what you should have paid anyways?
Yeah. So there's, some penalties and interest would apply. And then there are some ways to get that reduced. There's a procedure called first time abate where you can kind of basically say, you kind of get one free, from the IRS. So and then for innocent mistakes like that, IRS is not some big, mean, monolithic evil empire that, we normally think of it as. I've had lots of situations, where, someone's been audited and then the IRS just says, just fix it and then everything will be fine. So it's not necessarily the absolute end of the world if you get audited. I mean, you will have to pay the back tax, but it's not like, you'll necessarily need to pay a ton of penalties and interest on top of that.
Okay, so the crazy horror stories about us hearing people going to jail, that's always because they get warned and they just keep running from it, right?
Yeah, the line is between willfulness and non-willfulness. So willfulness is someone who knows the rules and they know they're breaking the rules and they know they're doing something wrong and they're hiding money from the government and things like that. And they're using fancy structures to obscure their ownership of assets and all kinds of, goofy stuff like that. But if you have a purely innocent, situation, then that's, you want to fix it. I mean, it's not something that you want to just kind of keep on rolling with. You want to, use a better legal structure, like we're about to talk about, so that you can legally, pay less tax. But it's not something to be overly, concerned about.
This is a good transition into the next part because I think a lot of reasons why people don't do this is because they are afraid that they're hiding something or it's somehow illegal. And I think that's why I was so excited when someone introduced me to you because you're an actual U.S. tax attorney. So this is kind of like your specialty, your expertise. How legal is creating a offshore company and basically going through your structure?
Yeah, it's 1,000% above board and legal. I mean, it's a perfectly normal and legal thing to do to set up a legal structure through which you do business. Now, you have to do it correctly and you have to use it only in the situations where it works. I mean, there are definitely are some situations where operating through a non-U.S. corporation would not be a legitimate thing to do for U.S. tax purposes. But whenever you live outside the U.S. and you have a business that you're doing, then yeah, it's a perfectly normal thing. I mean, so one example I like to think about is imagine in Paris right now, there's a gas station, right? Well, that gas station makes money by selling gas to Parisians and visitors who pull in, and buy gas from them. So the business is entirely conducted outside the U.S. Well, they, the gas station is probably owned by a French, corporation. So that's a perfectly fine way to structure that. There's no reason, and the owner of it may be a U.S. citizen. I mean, there's nothing U.S. involved. So it's perfectly okay to hold that business through a non-U.S. company. So let's maybe get into the requirements. So for Americans, digital nomads and expats, holding your business through a non-U.S. corporation, isn't something that works in every single situation, and it only works, in specific situations. So generally three things need to be true. So first, you do need to be an expat or digital nomad. You do need to live outside the U.S. more or less full time. Okay. And so there's some nuances here, but basically, if you qualify for the foreign earned income exclusion, then that's going to work. Okay. But I mention this because every single time I talk about these issues, someone contacts me and says, "Hey, I still live in the U.S. Can I fire up a non-U.S. company and do my business through that?" And the answer is no, you can't. So this stuff we're talking about is only for expats and digital nomads. So this does not work while you live in the U.S.
Even, this just stresses why it's so good to be location independent. I mean, there's just so many benefits of not living in the U.S., but, and you can travel as a digital nomad or just be an expat in another country, or you can, just be location independent. And the more and more I live this lifestyle, the more benefits I find from it. And the only reasons why people stay, you have to kind of weigh the pros and cons. Everyone has a reason to stay in the U.S., but reasons like this, these tax savings like this, just stack it in people's favor to be location independent. So, I'm really glad, that this is a legal thing to do if you really do live out of the U.S.
Yeah, and I'm going to write a book one of these days on this stuff, and I don't have a title yet, but I think the subtitle will be something like "Why Every Entrepreneur Should Consider Being an Expat and Every Expat Should Consider Being an Entrepreneur." Just the two things just absolutely go together hand in hand. So like you said, if you're of a mind to start a business and you're living in the U.S., well, you're going to pay a whole bunch of tax that you can save by getting outside the U.S. But at the same time, if you're already in Chiang Mai or wherever, and you're like a freelancer or you have a job, well, there's probably something you're interested in that you could start a niche website about, and then you could make some AdSense money and do some affiliate marketing and things like that. Or there are probably other, maybe if you're like a programmer. Sometimes these are the people that I get frustrated with or confused by, like people who actually know how to code stuff, but they're just doing it for a paycheck, and I'm like, dude, you've got this awesome skill that, like, if you read like, the entrepreneur subreddit or things like that, there's so many people that have ideas for apps, but they don't know how to code or whatever. So, and it's a kind of this constant thing where, they're trying to look for coders. But if you already know how to code stuff up, I'm sure you've got some idea for an app or a SaaS product or a SWAS product or something like that, that you can do. So it's just one of those things that, because of the ability to make money without paying a bunch of tax, I mean, it's a completely awesome thing to do.
Or they can team up with an entrepreneur who, if you can code, you can team up with an entrepreneur and develop it together. And that's another great idea. And if someone, if someone wanted to, they wanted to code, they're like, I don't want to be the entrepreneur. Can they freelance and, be based out of the US and still go through this? No.
Okay. So that's, perfect. So we're doing this like we planned it. I mean, this is good, John. So this is the second requirement. Okay. So in order to use a non-US corporation structure, first requirement is you got to live outside the US. You got to be an expat or digital nomad. Second requirement is you have to have a business. Okay. So not a profession. And here's the difference. When you have a profession, you are selling your own services. You're selling your time, your attention. Maybe you're selling it to one person, like as an employee or like an independent contractor or something. Or maybe you're selling it to a bunch of different people, as a freelancer or, as a tax attorney or whatever. I don't know. And so, but what people are buying is you, they're buying your time, your attention, your brain. They're renting your brain. Okay. So that's a profession. A business is basically anything where you're selling something that's not your own time and attention. Like it could be kitchen gadgets. It could be access to software. It could be, an experience, like a tour, to see the pyramids or whatever. So it could be also other people's time and attention, like if you're doing consulting, but it's not, it's not like, you for hire, but it's your team for hire. Well, that's a business. So that's the second thing is if you want to use a non-US corporation to get the better tax benefits, you need to have a business, not a profession. And this is something that you'll see online, people just get wrong, and a lot of those people who get this wrong, believe it or not, sell non-US corporations, so, if you're of a mind to start a non-US corporation, they say, yeah, sure, it works in your situation because, these people are often unburdened by being tax attorneys and actually knowing stuff works. So they can say whatever they want if they think it'll get you to buy a non-US corporation. But unfortunately, it doesn't work. And, I wish it did work to run a profession through a non-US corporation because I'm a professional, and I'm an expat and I pay a bunch of self-employment tax and I pay US federal income tax on what I make above $100,000 every year. And, if I could do it through a non-US corporation and save money, I absolutely would.
Okay. So, I guess my next question would be, I guess technically someone, instead of being the programmer themselves, they can create a business where they hire, other, programmers, and they become more of a, what would you call it? Like, I guess, I don't know the word for it, but like a business where they would, instead of them doing the work, they have other employees or other freelancers doing the work, and maybe they'll oversee it. Maybe they'll double check the work. Would that count? Yeah, absolutely. That sounds like, you're developing a SaaS product or an app or something like that. Yeah, that's great. That's a business, because what ultimately is being sold is not, your time and attention. It's something else. It's access to the app. It's access to the SaaS product, or it's a service. It's a SWAS sort of thing, like a service that goes along with, access to the SaaS product.
So yeah, that's all perfect.
What if someone created a course? So, it's a recording of them, it's of them teaching something and people are buying the course. So they're not trading their time and money, they're not trading their time anymore. It's not a service-based business anymore. And would that count as a business because you're selling them access to this course?
Yep, absolutely. That you're selling a product. So it's a digital product, but it's still a product, so that absolutely qualifies as a business. And, I sell courses and I've got a non-US corporation structure through which I sell my courses. So, so I'm taking my own medicine here.
But so the last one would be, someone has let's say someone has a blog or something and they're doing affiliate, they're making money through affiliate products. Would that also counts as a business because they're buying a product and, even though that person is spending their time, let's say, writing this blog or creating this niche website.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. Affiliate. Yeah. A niche website that makes money through affiliate marketing, AdSense, maybe native ad sales, other stuff like that. That's perfectly, perfect for this structure.
So it's really just people that are being billed, for their direct service. Okay.
Exactly. And so, third requirement in order to use a non-US corporation structure is that you can't have employees or other people that are called dependent agents in the United States. Okay. So that's an absolute key is you can't have people who wake up every morning in the US who work for your business. Okay. And so the reason for that is that if you have a business that's owned by a non-US corporation, but there are people that work for that non-US corporation in the US, then the non-US corporation is itself going to be subject to US tax. Okay. And so that would defeat the whole purpose of this basically. And, and not only would the non-US corporation be subject to US tax, it's subject to more US tax than you are as an individual. So if you just do the business as a self-employed person, and then you contribute it to a non-US corporation, you're actually going to end up paying more tax. Okay. So you want to make sure that you don't have employees or other dependent agents in the US. Now, it's perfectly fine to have independent agents in the US. You can have any number of independent agents. An independent agent is someone who has their own business going on and you are a client or a customer of them. Okay. Here's one example. Amazon. Okay. If you sell products on Amazon FBA, then yeah, Amazon is your agent, because they are handling your product, they're storing it, they're shipping it, they're handling payment processing and, all sorts of other things like that. But, Amazon's got its own little tiny business going on and you are one of their customers. And so they are an independent agent of yours. That's perfectly fine. Another example is if you hire people on Upwork, like you hire graphic designers or writers and you hire them on a pure, project by project sort of basis. That's perfectly fine. But you don't want to have an employee in the US. You don't want to have someone who, shows up at 8:00 with their lunch pail and then, you tell them what to do until 5:00 and then they go home. You don't want to have a person like that in the United States because then your non-US corporation is subject to US tax. So that's one of, this rule is kind of interesting. I think of it as sort of a US expat cohesion rule, So if you have the sort of business where you want to hire Americans, to help you with it, well, that's perfectly fine. But just make sure that those Americans also live in Chiang Mai or Bangkok or whatever, or Ho Chi Minh City or something. Make sure that they don't live in Rochester or Albuquerque or whatever.
And if they do, make sure they're a freelancer and not an actual employee.
Yeah. But again, the substance matters here. The actual facts of what's going on matter, not just like what you call them. So you can't salvage the situation by just giving them a 1099 instead of a W-2. Like if the actual nature of the relationship is, they show up at 8 with their lunch pail and do what you tell them to do. Well, then they are what's called a dependent agent. So yeah. I mean, that's one big limiting factor with this structure is it's got to be, you don't want to have people in the US who operate it.
Okay. That definitely makes sense. So where should people actually create this business? I always hear people talk about places like the British Virgin Islands, Belize, Nevis, St. Kitts, the Shelly's Islands. Does it, yeah. What do you recommend?
Yeah. So this is one of those issues that there's way more written online about this than is really warranted. it's just not that important. Like, honestly, here's a decent way to decide. Write down every one of those names that you just heard Johnny say, and then throw a dart and pick one. I mean, that's a perfectly fine way to decide. So here's how I think about the analysis as a whole. Okay, so there are U.S. tax benefits to operating through a non-U.S. corporation. So all we need is a non-U.S. corporation. Okay, so we have about 200 different options here. That's about how many countries there are. Well, some of those countries would generally impose tax on the legal entity that you create there just because you created it in that country. Okay. So if you're a U.S. citizen and you're living in Thailand and you have a location independent business, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to pay German tax by forming a German company to operate your business through. And it also doesn't make any sense to form an Australian company or whatever. Even in the Estonian company, Estonia has a 20% tax on dividends from the company. So it just doesn't make a lot of sense to pay tax, to volunteer to pay tax somewhere else. Okay. So that's kind of obvious, but I want to kind of show the analysis. So that knocks out a whole heap of countries, right? And then we get down to basically like the countries on the list that Johnny mentioned, plus things like Hong Kong, Singapore. Now, Hong Kong and Singapore are both just really complicated jurisdictions to have a company. And, you need a local company secretary. So you have to pay someone to be that you don't know, to be an officer of your company, which I think is sort of weird. And then you have to submit audited financials every year, which costs a decent chunk of money, like $2,000 or $3,000 to get your financials audited properly the Hong Kong way or the Singapore way. And you have to have a virtual office. And then a Hong Kong company is technically subject to Hong Kong tax. You have to actually apply. Okay. There's a 16.5% tax. So the company technically must pay. So then you have to, beg Hong Kong to allow you to not pay that tax. So those countries are kind of just a little bit complicated. So I just, say, well, let's, all we're trying to do is have a nice little non-U.S. company to pay to because we need the U.S. tax benefit. So let's avoid all that complication. So then you're left with, basically every jurisdiction that Johnny just mentioned, plus a bunch of other ones. Now, I live in Belize, okay, because in law school I met a woman from Belize and married her, and now I live in Belize, and so that's why I like Belize. If for some reason I'd met an Anguillan woman in law school or a Barbados person or whatever, well then I'd probably use those companies. But Belize, these countries all compete for business basically. So as soon as St. Kitts and Nevis come up with some new way of doing something with the company, well then the Cayman Islands changes their rules and does it too, and then Anguilla does it, and then Panama does it, and then Belize does it, and then BVI does it. So, all these countries are very easy. You can form a company there without going there. It's all pretty easy standard stuff as far as like not needing to do audited financials and all that kind of stuff like you do in Hong Kong. So there's really, my clients typically use Belize companies just because there's no reason to prefer some jurisdiction over Belize, and I'm here, and so it's pretty easy to do.
Okay, very cool answer. I know there's so many articles about where to base, and I think a lot of times people just like keeping people confused because they can produce more content. But I'm glad you've kind of just squashed that.
It's a lot of it's sales. Yeah, if you're living in the Seychelles and you have a business that sells Seychelles companies, well, you're probably going to have some reason why the Seychelles is the best place. Like, I've got a Wyoming registered agent I really like to use, and she has some song and dance about why Wyoming is a business-friendly state and blah blah blah. Yeah, sure, whatever. But the people in Nevada have that same song and dance. So Dan Norris wrote a really awesome book called The 7-Day Startup. And I think the subtitle is something like you don't learn until after you launch, and so I come across so many people who just like read all these websites and they might put charts together themselves about the difference between BVI and Belize and stuff like that. And they're just doing it as a way to feel like they're busy and to waste time. But really what they need to be doing is just launch your business already, And so one thing Dan Norris recommends is, in the 7-day startup, the idea is that to go from idea to actually having a business in 7 days, And so one of those days is like legal entity, tax, structuring sort of stuff like that. So get the stuff done in one day. And so that's kind of one of the reasons I put my online course together, is just as a way to kind of say, okay, why are you really worried about whether there's some juice to be had about incorporating in Barbados versus the Marshall Islands or whatever? I mean, do you really think? I mean, you think it's going to be just so much better? I mean, just so here's how to do it. In one day you can learn this stuff, and you can start getting it all set up.
Okay, so I think that the biggest parts of it is. First, you guys got to get location dependent. You guys got to, if you want to take advantage of benefits like this and a ton of other ones that, we don't have time to talk about, move out of the US, be location dependent. And if you already are, make sure you cut your ties to any state like California or New York or something, move out of there, get rid of that, and then start your non-US corporation, go through all of the steps there. If you guys want, it's kind of a step-by-step guide on how to do that. Stewart has a course. You can go to dropshiplab.com/tax, and that'll take you to his course. And it's great. It's lots of information in there. Personally, I think I watched it at 1.5 speed, and then I just rewound the parts where I needed more information about, and then watch it normally. So you can get through it, pretty quickly. But I think the biggest benefit of your course is that it comes with a 1-hour phone call, right? Are you still doing that for everyone?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. This stuff is like 90%, the course will tell you everything that you need to know, but, I'm a lawyer, so I like to make sure that everything is tailored to each particular person. And so that's what that 1-hour phone call is about, is let's make sure and look at your facts and see if anything's different that we need to tailor things to. And then let's also make sure you understand everything and feel like you have exactly what you need to get it all set up. Now, one thing I want to make sure, Johnny, that we did was we talked about earlier the tax consequences if you are a self-employed human and you make $200,000 of net profit. And remember, the answer is putting aside some rules that make it worse, you're going to end up paying like $50,000 in tax. That's the best case scenario. Well, let's look at it now. If you operate that same sort of business underneath a non-U.S. corporation. So remember, we're not, the activity here has got to be something like drop shipping, affiliate marketing, traffic arbitrage, SaaS product, and selling apps, things like that. Not a freelance product. You have to live outside the U.S. and you can't have employees in the U.S. So with all of that in place that we talked about before, then so here's how it works for tax purposes. Now you are not a self-employed human anymore. Instead, you wear two hats. You are an employee of a non-U.S. corporation, and you are the owner of a non-U.S. corporation. So in your role as employee, you can get a salary from the company, and that salary is just a nice, clean, about $100,000 free of U.S. federal income tax, free of self-employment tax. Okay, you're not self-employed, you're an employee, so there's no self-employment tax. And then because you're just making the money as a salary, not as profits from a business, then that 30% rule we talked about goes away, and that scale back rule that we talked about also goes away. So it's a nice, clean $100,000 out of the company without paying any U.S. federal income tax or self-employment tax. And then the amount that you leave in the company, the net profits above your salary, that's only subject to tax down the road whenever you decide to cause the company to pay you a dividend. Okay, so say you want to buy a house or something, and all the money's in the company. Well, you'd cause the company to pay you a dividend. You pay tax at that point at ordinary income rates, and then you would you'd be able to buy your house. So if you have a year where your salary is less than $100,000, then your tax bill that year is going to be $0. And then you're deferring the U.S. tax on the amount that you don't pay out as a salary, the amount that you keep in. And so that allows you on that $100,000, to invest $100,000, whereas if you were in California, for example, and you wanted to invest that $100,000 that you made, well, it's going to look a whole lot more like $60,000 or $65,000. Because you're going to pay taxes that year. So you get to invest on a pre-tax basis. So that's a pretty if you get a spreadsheet out and kind of look at what your net worth is like 20 years just on the fact that you got to invest that amount on a pre-tax basis. I mean, it's a pretty awesome benefit.
So when you say invest, do you mean your company that you own that has that $100,000 can invest in like index funds and real estate and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. That's exactly what you can do.
That's very, very cool.
Yeah. If you earn if the company earns passive income on those investments, then that passive income is subject to tax in the year that it's earned. Okay. It's called Subpart F income. It's a special rule that says that Subpart F income kind of sails straight through the company. It's not held back by the corporation structure like income from an active business is. So I like to invest in stuff that doesn't earn income. So like you mentioned ETFs. I mean, the awesome thing about exchange traded funds is that you get the investment profile of a mutual fund because you can invest in different sectors or just like the stock market as a whole, but it has the tax consequences of a single stock. So you only have gain or loss whenever you decide to sell it. If you invest in a mutual fund, then, generally that mutual fund will allocate up to you the gain or loss that's inherent in the churn and the activity, inside the fund. So basically that's the whole goal here is you turn off the negative rules that hurt the foreign earned income exclusion. You turn off the self-employment tax and you get to invest. Now, sometimes people say, well, how much should I be making before I do this structure? And if you think of it from that perspective, well, just saving the self-employment tax is a huge benefit, So, like that's, even if you're only making like $10,000 a year, self-employment tax is going to be $1,500. And so, you could use that $1,500 in much better ways to actually get your legal structure set up so that you're in a position. You don't want to. Whenever you have a business, you don't want to kind of hope that you don't make money, right? I mean, you want to get your legal structure in place so that whenever the traffic really hits and things start working, you're all set up to go.
And kind of the estimated cost to set all this up from kind of what I remember, it was less than $1,000 to actually set up the company and get pretty much everything that you need, right?
Yep, absolutely. I think that's a good round number for the amount to spend. And the whole idea of my course is to get you to the point where you understand exactly how all this stuff works, and then you understand exactly who to contact to set the structure up. And then it has the actual legal documents that you need as part of the structure. And then it comes with a call with me, like you mentioned, Johnny, so that we can go over everything and make sure you understand. So, it's really like a quick start guide to get you going in the best way without having to spend a whole bunch of money to hire someone else to do it for you. Now, if you do want to hire someone else to do it for you, well, I do that as well, obviously. So I can do that as well. But the course, really is, it really does show you exactly how to do it if you're of a mind to spend a little time yourself to take care of it.
Yeah, and I've been through the course. I can vouch for that. I mean, I think there's enough information, even in this interview alone, where if you guys went back and listened to this 2 or 3 times, you could just set it up yourself. But, I would recommend if you guys are serious about setting up your international business and doing this, you guys should do it correctly. And I think just that hour phone call with you would be worth it. But first, obviously go through the course, and then that way you can get all the basics of it. You can see how everything's set up, and then ask all the questions you want over that call and set it up that way. I don't think anyone, needs to pay for the extra service to have you or anyone else do it for them. I think the course itself is already, is already out there. I do want to have one suggestion for you, Stewart, because I was still a little bit confused in some of the forms when I was filling it out. So my suggestion to you would be to include a sample kind of pre-filled out form of whenever you send over paperwork, and that way someone can kind of see which boxes they should be checking and what they should be writing in each section.
Yeah, absolutely. I realized that was kind of lacking in the original course, so I've added an example of an IRS form W8B and E, which is a form that you have to fill out whenever you do like an Amazon tax interview and things like that. So that, just like you said, Johnny, you'll know exactly which boxes to check.
Yeah, and you were super cool about emailing me back. I just felt like I was kind of wasting your time every time I, was like, okay, in this line, like which box do I check? But overall, I'm excited to have an international company now in Belize. And I'm excited, to be able to make more money and invest more money and do it legally. So thank you so much for not only coming on the show, but also creating this course.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Johnny. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So if you guys want to check out Stewart's course, you go to dropshiplab.com/tax, or go to the show notes and there'll be a link there for you to join in. And I'm excited to kind of hear from you guys how much money you guys save next year. And even if you don't go through the whole process today, just get it started. I think that's the number one thing I would recommend to everyone. Obviously, if you guys are paid even $5,000 in income tax last year, you can already double your ROI. Let's say you spend $800 on the course and then another $1,000 setting it all up. It's even at that point, you would have had a, 200% ROI. So if you're spending 10 grand or more in income tax and you are either living abroad already or you're planning on living abroad and being location dependent, you should definitely look into setting up this structure. So thanks again to Stewart for coming on the show. Honestly, I still don't understand anything that we just talked about, so I might have to re-listen to the show a couple of times just to get it, and maybe even go through his course again. But it was awesome having this much just amazing information on this episode. Definitely this is one of those ones to share with anyone who is location dependent, who hates paying taxes, which is probably everybody. Sorry to the people who are non-American. Actually, no. Good for you guys if you're non-American, because as he mentioned in the show, most of you guys and gals that are non-U.S. citizens can have your own tax benefits and breaks. So find out what they are for your country. I know for almost every country that I've heard of, maybe even including Canada and the UK, if you're living out of that country for even 6 months, you don't have to pay income tax for that year. I know there's a lot of rules to that, so do your own research, but take a look, because I think it's super interesting. I also want to thank our sponsor, TripStreak, for taking care of this podcast. And if you guys want to book a flight to Belize, to Southeast Asia, to Chiang Mai, or, to wherever you are in the world, check out tripstreak.com/travel like a boss. And thanks so much for everyone who left these amazing 5-star reviews of the podcast. This week, I want to thank NYC Allen. He says, best podcast on iTunes, 5 stars. Johnny, I'm a huge fan of your podcast. I want to thank you and your guests for sharing their online success stories, inspiring us to become digital entrepreneurs. Props to you for offering a ton of knowledge and being so resourceful to us listeners. Keep doing what you do, and I hope to be on your podcast someday. And Alan, I would hope for you to be on here too. I love it when past listeners become a future guest. So the best thing you guys can do is become location dependent, build a business, become successful, and hopefully we will meet up somewhere in the world. If you guys haven't joined the Facebook group yet, it is the Travel Like a Boss Army, and there is where I announce all the meetups we're having. So make sure you subscribe to the email list as well as hop on to the group, and hopefully I'll see you guys somewhere around the world, and hopefully we can figure out how to legally not have to pay as much tax. We have more money to do cool things. See you guys all next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Travel Like a Boss podcast. If you want to hear more, including the bonus How to Choose the Perfect Niche episode, join our mailing list at travellikeabosspodcast.com. See you next week, and remember, if you want to travel like a boss, you need to be your own boss. So start your online business today and start living the lifestyle you've always dreamed of.